Hello everyone, and welcome to Mastering the Art of Magical Effects in Houdini. My name is JAYDEN PATERSON, and thank you for joining this workshop. I'm just going to quickly try and describe everything we'll be covering in the 8 weeks. So it's split into 8 weeks in total. 4 of those weeks we'll be dealing with one production style shot. So that's this one over here. I've tried to form this into more of a shot production style than a standard tutorial, just so that the actual effects we're working on we need to deal with in a sort of live fashion. So we need to be considerate of the type of camera used, the distance from camera, take all of that into account while we're working on the effects. So we will work on the first effect in the initial 4 weeks. The first effect will be the portal over here. So that will take 2 weeks of our time to work on the portal, starting with the basic setup of the scene and this shot over here. Looking for reference, general inspiration for this type of effect. Also touching a little bit on the difference between generating more magical style effects for fantasy versus the more sci-fi type of effect we're going for here in these shots. On top of that, we'll start to work on the basics of most good general magic setups for the portal, which starts out with a standard volume simulation, and then we get quite involved in the advection of the particles. We start to play with what we can do with the particle sims after the sim and see how far we can take it. In general, I think the first week will be a good introduction to the way I work personally, to my workflow, and to how I approach using Houdini as an artist. In general, I would not describe myself as a TD. I'm not the most technical person, and so if you're looking for someone to teach you how to do a nested for loop instead of a copy stamp inside of a compile network, I'm not that person. I am much more an artist first. So my approach has always been, when I picked up Houdini, was I needed to make something work. I needed to make sure the pictures look good. How can I bend Houdini to my will to make that happen? And that's kind of been my approach ever since. So this first effect in this shot is a broad stroke introduction to that kind of part of my workflow, and how we can very simply and very quickly get complex looking effects just by using some of the more simple style tools that we have available. So I hope you find that interesting, and in terms of the general stuff we'll be looking at during the entire course, I hope there's a more emphasis on the artistic aspect of it and less on getting bogged down by a lot of the technicalities or the technical details. So moving on, after the portal, we'll be taking a look at the second effect here in weeks 3 and 4, which is this magical shield. So once again, a few of the same elements will apply and techniques, but with a few extra things to go on top of that. So a little bit extra on the shading, some more interesting lighting aspects, and then obviously we also deal with the secondary effects that surround our main magic over here. So we'll be doing the bullets, the impacts, all that smoke and everything you see there. In week 3, we'll basically do pretty much the bulk of the work on the shield. So procedurally setting up the shield, how it's placed in the scene, how big it is, and then the particles and advection workflows we use to generate the main part of that effect in that shot. And in week 4, we'll add a bunch of the extra elements. So make sure we've got some really interesting layers, maybe some extra details on that shield, and all of the environmental effects and lighting as well. I should mention that for both of these effects and for all of the effects in this workshop, they all involve a fair amount of compositing. And with magic in general, you will find that magic in particular does need quite a lot of compositing, in a way that sort of destruction or purely volumetric effects work might work without compositing. Magic can really be taken to the next level in comp. So we do spend a fair amount of time in comp as well, going through that. And whether you're using Houdini, Nuke or Fusion, you should be able to follow along for the most part. At this point, I think Fusion is still actually free, so if you are interested in picking it up, they're not that different, and you can get used to Fusion if you know Nuke quite easily, I think. I actually use both at the moment. Moving on from that, from week 5 to 8 is another shot, which I'll show you here. This is our decloak and our EMP shockwave effects. So at this point we jump into a completely different shot, different camera, different environment, and a different main character type thing here. So once again, hoping to learn a few extra techniques that I generally use to drive the unwrapping or unfolding animation of this drone object. We generally call that a decloak. It's an invisible object and it's becoming visible before it does its magic power. So a bunch of extra stuff involved here that we would not have tackled in the previous effects, such as those lines and the electrical arcs traveling on the surface, and then a little bit of a more detailed SOP-based geometry editing as well. I would say this particular effect also has some slightly more advanced shading techniques. Nothing too crazy, but we do spend some time in the shader, and then a pretty complicated composite as well. Then moving on into the last 2 weeks of the course, we tackle this EMP effect, which kind of the goal with this one was to try and bring together a bunch of the techniques we had used in the previous effects to see if we can apply them to something completely different. So here we've got this shockwave, we have impact dust, we have some magical element in the middle of the shot, and we have quite a lot of electricity, some shading as well, and just general effects lighting. So just to recap, I think we pretty much tackle everything and every technique I use to deal with magical style effects. In this course, it is definitely a lot more sci-fi focused, but every single one of these elements is very applicable to a fantasy style, for example. So magic is magic at the end of the day, and what directors and clients want to see is these energy related elements. The electrical effects have their part in that magical list as well, along with the advected particles that we render here and rasterize in this shot as well. In terms of following along with me as I'm working through the course, I do try and not move too quick, but at the same time it would be beneficial if you have some knowledge of Houdini already and are quite comfortable moving around. I'll cover that in another video just to discuss the prerequisites. But in general, what I want anyone who does this course to get out of it, and even if that's someone who's very experienced and can already do all of this stuff and they have their own methods and techniques, is more to take away my own personal viewpoint, and that is, make sure to always keep the art first, unless you're going out to actually become a TD specifically. I think everyone would agree the most important thing is, what does the end product look like? And so my method of using Houdini is just make sure I'm constantly looking at the end product. I don't care how deep my networks go, how advanced, how many wrangles I use. At the end of the day, I consider myself to be using very simplistic approaches in Houdini to achieve as complex looking art as I can. And so it's more of a guerrilla style use of Houdini to get maximum effect on the final image. So I hope in some capacity you latch on to that kind of message in the course, and at least take away that fundamental want to experiment and test out and use that approach yourself to focus on the art and to use Houdini in a way that makes creating that art pretty easy for you. So with that said, welcome to Mastering the Art of Magic, and I'll see you guys in the next few weeks. Hello everyone. So before we get stuck into the course proper, just an overview of what I think the prerequisites are for joining this course. So I wouldn't personally call this a super advanced course if you already know your way around Houdini and you actually make effects yourself. If you're an effects artist in any capacity and have knowledge of DOPs in general, pops as well, and you know your way quite smoothly around sops and you've done your own shading, etc., then you should be able to follow along quite easily. So in general, I would say a basic general knowledge of Houdini as a whole would be extremely beneficial. If you consider yourself a little bit more on the early stages of your learning progress, then you might find I move a little bit too quickly through some of the important aspects here. So I might just very quickly throw down some pop nets and some DOPs and get a result and carry on from there. And hopefully you'll be able to follow along with that. But if you don't, I'm pretty sure you can catch up or go through it slower or rewatch it, however you want to do it. But keep that in mind that there are some of the more effects heavy areas where I probably do move quite quickly through that. And so if you don't feel particularly comfortable in very quickly moving around Houdini, for example, or jumping from one section to another and relying heavily on particles and volumes, then you should consider, if you haven't yet, taking some of the prerequisite courses to get up to speed on that. And so here in the course on Rebelway, the prerequisite is Introduction to Houdini Effects Artists, or Introduction to Effects in Houdini, which I think is a great one to go with, because what I'm saying is that basically if you know Houdini, so if you're a lighter in Houdini or something, you might find it difficult if you don't have experience jumping in and out of the effects related techniques that I'll be using. So any experience in using Houdini as an effects artist, or if you know the basics of running particle simulations and advecting particles with volumes, then you should be fine to follow along quite happily. So I look forward to seeing you guys and talking more in the coming weeks. Bye. Hello everyone. So just a quick introduction over here to let you know what to expect in week 1. So obviously this week we will be starting our portal effect. And to start with, we'll take a look at as much reference as we can and just get some inspiration. It's a pretty good time at this point during the week to also look at your own reference. So if you see something interesting that you like, and I'm not going down that route, then please save those images and look at that reference and try and make your own effects go in that direction instead of mine. After that, we'll start with just the basic scene setup over here and also work on our initial volume simulation. And that simulation ends up being what drives all of the effects in the portal itself. So that's another good opportunity to experiment and push the effect in a direction that I don't. After the volume sim, some basic advection of points, and we'll have a few layers of particle advection done through that simulation, with options to take it in different directions through our pop network. And then finally, before the week is done, we should be experimenting with SOP-based approaches to add some interest to these layers. So basically the effect doesn't end after the sim, and we spend a bunch of time experimenting after the sim, adding deformations and using some tips and tricks over there to help make our layers interesting. So it's going to be a pretty busy week, and by the end of it we'll pretty much have the bulk of our portal simulation work done. And I hope you enjoy it, so I'll see you in the next video. Hi guys, welcome to week 1 of mastering the art of magical effects in Houdini. I'm just going to start with a short video to discuss what we'll be working on firstly, and to look at some reference and inspiration for the two first effects. So what we have, and I've set this up in Houdini already, so I think I'll be sharing this with you guys. Scene 1, shot 1 is the portal, and then the magical shield. And what I've done is it's magical effects, and all of these workflows that I'll be using I use for both sci-fi and fantasy style magic, but for this course I've decided to lean more towards sci-fi just to make it interesting. So from the next video we'll be diving straight in with setting up the scene and getting ready to make the portal. So in general, I mean, I usually do look up a bunch of reference, and I use Pinterest. You can see I've typed in portal effects already. ArtStation, specifically for magic, because there's no real life video reference we can find. Concept art is really good for that. So let's just have a look firstly at Pinterest here. Something that comes up a lot is this Blink portal from X-Men, which is really awesome. And if you don't have a Pinterest account, I highly recommend you make one, because you could save a board and just sort of every time you see an interesting image, save it to the board and then revisit that while you're working on the effect, to get inspiration and get ideas for extra elements that you can add. That's really cool. So I've already done this, and I've looked at some things that I find interesting, and I think if you do this as well, and I don't end up going down that route for the portal or for any of the effects, but you see something that you really like, then maybe try and spend some time incorporating that into your effects instead of following 100% what I'm doing. That would be really, really good. And if we look at ArtStation here, see what we find. Loads of inspiration, and I think concept art in particular is really good for showing you how simple something could be. Like, we are going to try and get as much detail as we can once we're working in Houdini, but you see an image like this, it doesn't need to be complex, and it doesn't need to have lots of small details. It fits within the overall image and works really well. So a lot of times people will just spend way too long trying to add small details that you don't see, and in this case it's literally just one color with a small glow, and I think there's maybe some particles, but overall it really works. So I'll usually grab a bunch of these kind of images as inspiration. And obviously Vimeo as well. Let's see what we find. Yep, the blink effect comes up immediately. Let's have a look at this. So this is, I think everyone's trying to recreate this one, so we'll try and steer clear and make our own thing. Although there is some really good things going on in here, like, I mean, this anticipation, the flashing lights before it opens is really nice. There's a sense of small flakes flying off, so maybe we'll use that as one of our elements, but overall we'll try and not recreate the exact same look. So yeah, this is what I usually do. Save it into a folder, or like I said in Pinterest, make a board that has lots of good looking images, and we'll revisit that as we're working. So basically what I'm trying to do with the first one is, obviously we have this big horizontal style portal, which is a bit different, and I've put in these sort of layout circles to indicate the scale, and we're looking at pretty much the full top half of the frame being filled with the portal, which hopefully makes it quite dramatic. So anything that kind of seems to fit that style, and given that I'm leaning towards sci-fi instead of fantasy, obviously the blues are pretty cool colors, sort of shiny, there's some particles in there. Let's see what I have. I've got a pictures folder, so I've got that blink effect, and I've got this image which I think is from the Flash TV series. So at the moment I'm going to be trying to make something similar to this, and then we'll add and subtract elements as we feel like it. So go ahead, gather some reference, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll get stuck into the Houdini side of things. Welcome back, guys. I've just opened up the basic scene here. This is the scene that you'll be getting as well, just to discuss what I have and how I have it set up before we get properly started. So I have the basic gray environment and the character animation, and I've got the layout circles that are my timing and scale reference for now. The full shot is 220 frames, which does include the shield. So I've just set the timeline to 130, just so that when we start wrapping out stuff, we're not writing down things we don't need. And then there's a couple of lights, and I've got this null, which I'll be referencing for my ROPs. I've set some aliases for cache locations and render locations, and this is basically goes to that location, sets the name to the name of the object, and then to the name of the ROP, and that'll just help keep things simple once we start writing stuff out. Let me take a quick screenshot just to discuss how I'm currently thinking about the effect. From a director or client point of view, I would be assuming that if he's traveling into this location from somewhere else, you at least want the effects to move outwards. I'm using a mouse, so don't judge. Instead of basically having stuff moving in, because out implies an exit, and in just wouldn't make sense. So I'll be kind of sticking with that. You don't have to. There's lots of ways you could do this, but I'll just do the basic sci-fi trope. And another thing to think about at this point, because the shield is taking up the full top half of the camera, compositionally it's kind of interesting, because you would have these lines that sort of travel out into the scene, and these are useful for drawing the eye into the spot that you want. So hopefully we'll will draw the eye of the viewer into this spot before the character even jumps through. And I can already tell that to make this, basically I just need a source, and I want to throw out smoke or particles radially from that and take it from there. In terms of the settings, everything's default. The color settings are default for now. We might change them later once we see how the color ramps are reacting. And we will end up setting up lookup tables, LUTs for our renders and for compositing. So for now I'm just going to put down a geo, and I'll cut this video short and carry on in the next one. But just to talk a little bit about my usual workflow is we'll be making two effects. So we start with the portal. I'll make a geo and I'll try and get as much down in here as possible. And then if I want more layers to add complexity, I'll usually put down a bunch of, like put down a new object and maybe object merge something from here into that and then carry on working from there. But for the most part, I want as much as possible in one. That's just the way I work. You also don't have to follow that workflow at all. So I'll end this video here and I'll catch you in the next one. Hello. So let's get started. Let me make this a bit bigger. This is probably going to drive you crazy because what I do is the viewport is the most important thing to me usually, and I have my object network quite small and it drives people crazy, but I'll try and make it bigger than usual so you can at least see. So let's dive in. Actually, let me hide some stuff. I'll keep the character for some reference and hide everything else. Set this to ghost. And let's jump in and start doing stuff. So my sort of approach to this and everything I do is to just start throwing stuff down and not tweak. So I want to build a setup that works or does something interesting, even if it doesn't look great. If I think it has potential, I'll keep moving down until I reach some kind of interesting checkpoint and then go back and work on the details and the look. So I'll do the same here. As I said in the previous video, I know I basically just want something in the middle, shooting volume and particles out, and I think we can build the rest of the effect on top of that. So I've put down a sphere. I'm going to use a shelf tool to just get the smoke going. I actually usually do use the shelf tools just to make it quicker, just for me. Get nodes down and I'll delete what I don't need. And I'll actually copy out all the stuff in this DOP and make my own in here. They've changed the workflow for the DOP volume sourcing, so I'm kind of glad I've decided to use the shelf tool. Just pop this in here, make sure it works. All good. So let's see what we've got. So scattered points with density and temperature. Adding some noise to both of those and rasterizing it. So what we want for starters is some velocity. So I'll put down a point. Quickly name this. I'll try and name things as I go, but I might go through a phase of cleaning up. Add some V. based on normal. Let me make a velocity visualizer here. I don't like the trail one. I prefer this one. So that's working. I'll just boost that up ×5. Just make sure that's carrying through. I'll put down a dot import fields. I'm sure you guys are mostly familiar with the volume workflow anyway, but I'll go through the way I usually do this and then get as far as possible, probably end the video at some point where I feel like there's a good base setup, and then do some extra work on it and some tweaks, because playing around with the values and sort of experimenting, it takes a while. So what I'll do is on the next video, if I ever spend time and change lots of parameters, I'll go over everything I changed and try and sort of recap where we're at. So here I only need density and velocity. Just check our velocity is working. It is. I'm going to switch the clamping off on the resize. We don't need that. And let's save. Right, so we have velocity outwards, but I want flat velocity. And just a word now, I'm actually, I know I'm at the origin. I'm going to leave it at the origin. Like, this might save us from some issues later. So it's kind of useful to stay at the origin for this effect, because I don't want it to interact with the character really, or the environment. So we're safe to work here, and then I can always transform it into the correct place later. So we want to flatten this. If we just flatten the sphere, then we get nice flat velocities as well. And let's see what we've got. Hopefully something that looks more like a portal. Yeah, that looks pretty interesting. What's it doing? I think it's floating up. Switch off some buoyancy. We don't need that either. So, like I was saying, I'm not going to tweak the volume settings right now. I think it's probably too turbulent, but it works. It looks okay. Let's carry on moving forward. I'm going to jump straight in. For me, pretty much every magical effect, at least as a base, consists of some kind of volume sim driving particle advection, and then that point cloud forms the basis of the magic. So let's actually put down a circle, because if we're going to source into the volume, we probably want the dimensions of the portal opening defined now. So this is where I need to see where the character is. Where is he? So I'm going to go crazy with the divisions just in case we end up sourcing from these points. Scale this up a little bit. Looks about right. So I'll use that. Maybe scatter some points on it. I don't generally use the relaxed iterations. It's a bit slow for my liking, so let's go crazy here as well. Maybe that's too much for testing. So I'll plug that in there, put the volume in the second input, and let's see what happens here. Set the source to all points and put down an advect by volumes. So in this case, right, set second context. Yeah. So in this case, advection type, I would usually use velocity. Obviously it depends what you want. In this case I want the particles to fully resemble the volume simulation, so I'll update velocity, and usually I default to trace. Single step, trace is more accurate for me. Single step seems to overshoot if you have particularly high velocity fields from a volume sim. Then the pop can't keep up, so the particles end up shooting outside of that advector range. So my default is trace. You can use single step, but basically if you see points not doing what you expect them to do, try and change it to trace. Might fix the problem. Right, let's see what happens. So that looks okay. Make the point smaller. I kind of like the start. Like I said before, I think it's too crazy on the turbulence. But that's cool for now. So let's hide this character. So one thing I don't want is for the portal effects to have much height. We can introduce height later, but I mean for the base particle advection, let's try flatten that out. So our options are, and I do like doing a lot of work post sim, so you could just sort of flatten these points out afterwards and take it from there. For advection points, it's kind of useful to do as much as possible inside the popnet. For a few reasons, but for me the main reason is if you're changing the positions artificially every frame during the simulation, then the particle has to be advected from that position. So you actually end up with a completely different result. So if I put down a wrangle or a VARP to try and maintain a flat circle, then the particles are being advected from that new position and it will look completely different. So hopefully you'll see that. You could use a VARP or a wrangle. I'm just going to use a VARP because all I want to do is take the velocity and we want to take Y and make sure that if it's traveling either up or down, so in positive or negative Y, that we slow those points down so they stay nice and low. So we'll just be updating the velocity here. So I'll say compare the Y velocity if it's not equal to 0, so if it's traveling up or down, two-way switch. If it is traveling up or down, then multiply the Y velocity by 0.25, and if it's at 0, then don't do anything to the velocity. And if I reset this now, whoa. So you can see already that it's completely different from when I just used the transform to flatten it. And it actually looks pretty cool. I kind of like it. I'll put the camera down here to pretend like we're in the shot. Yep, that's a good start. So what I've done up till now is basically just without changing anything, started with nothing and have a workable setup. Basically, like this is the approach that I can use to make a lot of the layers that can go into building the effect. So I mean, as an example, I already like this, so what I'll do is I'll just duplicate the pop net, and it's really all about experimentation for me. So immediately I'll try, like, what if I just emit from the circle instead of the scattered points? And that's already completely different. I mean, it's the same noises and stuff, but the look is different. So I really like working like this. I feel like you can try different sources, you can add noises here maybe, and have different noises for each pop. You could just have multiple volume sims and have a different one for multiple pops, but you could see that you could build up a bunch of layers here and experiment, and then just bring together the ones that you really like. So let's see. So we have this. What we probably don't want is a constant flow. So I'm going to put down a VOP and add some noise to the source. And I'm actually going to make the background black. I often feel like I can't see these properly. Make the points bigger. So we can just have any kind of noise here really. It's going to start with, that's pretty cool. Start with something like that. And then what we'll do is, and I'll experiment with this later, but basically we could have a different noise and have multiple pops, and that'll bring a lot of different variation to the layers. So here let's just delete anything that's not white. And maybe that's a bit extreme. And increase the substeps. So a bit slower. But you can kind of see what I'm getting at, and I mean, I could obviously tweak for ages here, and I don't want you to watch me just trying out things. Like I said, part of this is basically put down a bunch of stuff that you feel comfortable experimenting with, and then take the time and really try different things. I'll come back when this video is done and try maybe add some variation to the noise, like make it move over time. Try a different noise on this one, change some simulation settings inside. So I'll play around with this a bit, and I'll see you in the next video and probably recap anything I've changed up until this point. See you. Welcome back, guys. I have opened up the scene again. I actually haven't come back and changed anything yet. I decided I would record this video of me actually experimenting with stuff, so it might not go well, or I might come up with something cool, I don't know. So you could probably skip this video if you don't want to spend some extra time just watching me mess around, basically. But let me get started. So let me get back my thought process from last time. Basically, so I have this noise and I'm going to promote these parameters and play with this a little bit. I think, let me change the background back to blue. So we just want something large enough to have an overall effect on the final shape of the simulation. So I don't want too much detail. Just enough to break it up so that we get some interesting streaks or something from the actual sim. Let's go for something like this. Something like that looks okay, and then I'll just put $F in here and get this moving a bit. Maybe just very slow. And let's see how this looks through the sim. And let me delete a little bit more than this. This will save us on simulation time, and when we're caching stuff out, save us on some disk space. So kind of what I'm currently thinking is, if we can break this up enough and it changes over time, then this particular thread of the network will fill up some spaces in the environment, and then maybe another simulation will fill up the gaps in between, and that should make it look a bit more complex. So, and I also don't want to clamp the noise too much, because I want as much range between the whites and the blacks as possible to allow for when we go down and color the particles and figure out how we're going to render them. If we can take this range all the way through with us, I'll have a lot more to play with when we're messing with the color ramps. So that looks okay. I might break it up just a little bit more. We need more points. Something like that. And I was just looking at the sim and it's looking very flat. So I might now experiment with well, this is too broken up. I need to try some different versions of that VOP where I was affecting the velocity of the points. So let me just try that now. So in here I was comparing velocity to 0, but instead I think I would like to compare the point's position. So basically we could say if the point is above 0, and this is where it comes in handy that we're working at the origin. If the point's above or below 0, then multiply its velocity on y by negative some number. So basically, as the point starts moving above this, it should be multiplied by negative y and change direction and come back into the advection. So I'm hoping if we do that, we might get a little bit more interesting result from the actual advection there than what we were seeing now, which was very flat. So compare the point's y position to 0. If it's not equal to 0, then multiply the y velocity by negative. So very quickly change its direction, otherwise do nothing. So let's have a look at this. I've got too many sub-steps at the moment. I can't remember what we set it before. Just put it to 1 for now. Okay, so that's already a little bit more interesting, I think, because I did want it to look a bit flat, but this is still kind of holding its shape, which is giving some really interesting results. Yeah, I like that. Let's stick with that for now. Save. Right, so we have a noise that moves, and we have an advection system that we like. And I was thinking of trying, see here, I'm going to just shift this over so we keep what we've made before. I was thinking of trying one of the new pop forces, which was, I think it's pop fluid. So if we had vect, let me just disable this. If we had vect now, this we should be able to get something that feels almost like a viscous fluid, which could be interesting. I'm constantly changing the size of these points. Right, that is very strange. I kind of like it. I'm not sure it's going to work for a portal. Wow. Okay, so let's see what we've got. Update positions. Update velocities. We've got particle separation, right. So there's a few things to play with here. It seems if it's using particle separation, it's going to be highly dependent on the amount of points we have in the sim. So obviously if it's expanding like that, I'm guessing it needs to be a lot smaller. But that value will completely change if I decide to pump more points into this. But you can see already dividing it by 10 and we're getting a more correct scale. So what do we get from this? Not really seeing anything. I guess there does seem to be some kind of surface tension force at play here, which would be really nice if it was more obvious. It's definitely doing something. What I'm going to do now is actually just fix this stepping before we carry on, because it's bothering me a bit. So the thing is, this circle doesn't have any initial velocities. So I think I'm just going to transfer our velocities from our volume source. So we'll take those, and scatter should work. Got our noise. And then in here, if we switch inherit velocity to 0, and then I'll play with these jitter settings and use the point velocity, so we get some shifting in the points when they're born. So that's kind of fixed some of the stepping, but it looks like the color is still being affected. It's a lot better. Right, so we take that, we switch our pop fluid back on, and let's see. Let's just boost up these constraint iterations. I guess what I should be doing, and I guess what you guys will be doing, is reading up or looking on Oddforce or the side effects forums at any new tool that comes out. I kind of just read these little captions and change some values and see what happens. It's very slow. Let me put this a little bit up just so it's actually usable and I can try and figure out what the settings do. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I don't want you to sit and have to watch me play around. I just thought it would be interesting to try. So I'll save this here for now and spend some time trying that new solver. And then, like I said, I'm going to kind of split this up now and experiment with different sources. So say we split this up here. Here we could have maybe a lower frequency noise. It's less rough, but it moves a bit more. And we have a bit more range in this one. Plug that in here. That's all good. Does this have our source? No. So what did I do? It was negative back and use point velocity. I really like this one. It's like an octopus or something. Yeah, that works for me. So you can see that I'm removing sections of it before the pop sim. Overall it's still forming quite a solid shape, so probably going to end up playing with these noises a bit. I don't want both of these to necessarily form a solid shape, because that would kind of defeat the purpose. Although if this one is using that new pop fluid, I guess it'll look completely different, but I won't know until later on. And then this was the one where I just used the ring, which I also really like. I'm going to keep that. Let's see if I can think of something else to try. Thinking maybe one again on the noise front is a very sparse noise. So if there's very small, I'm going to actually put in a ramp here. If there's very small sections of points, so that the advection kind of will just shoot out little tight beams of particles into the sim, So something like that. Something like that maybe. Let's have a look. Double check. Nope. Negative, back. Use velocity. Switch that off. So I just want to break this up a little bit more. Something like that, so you kind of get the idea. And what I could do is treat them all completely differently here as well, so I could have different colors for each one of these, and when we merge them later on you can kind of tell the difference. So let me end this one here, and what I'm going to do is spend some time playing with the pop fluid, see if I can get something interesting, playing around with the noises and the simulation settings, and I'll get back to you in the next video and we can recap anything I changed. Bye. Hello, welcome back. So I've gone through the scene and cleaned it up and made a few changes. So I'm going to do a brief recap of what's different from the previous video, and then show you where we're at in terms of the result and the look. For starters, I actually ended up, I'll just go through this. I changed the density of the volume simulation to use volume scatter. So if I show you what happens here, before I had it on surface, which automatically takes the velocity. But if you fill the entire sphere, which is what I wanted to do just to make sure there was no gap in the middle for the volume sim, I had to attribute transfer the velocity back onto the scattered points. So that's the only change there. And then I actually didn't change any of the settings in the volume sim. I just left those the same. I've ended up locking the scatter. I was getting some strange cooking where Houdini would re-cook the scatter while I was trying to move the noise around, so I've just locked it in case that comes up again. Not sure why that was happening. So most of this you've seen. What I've done is I've put down a point replicate after the scatter, so that because I locked this off, so we don't need to compute that at all. And for one pop sim, I can have more points than another one. Let me show you just what I mean exactly. So here I've got the same points, and at the moment I'm not even increasing the amount of points. This one is the same as the scatter, and then this one has 10 times the amount of points. So it gets a little bit more full. So I'll show you why I've done that in more detail when I show you the results. Here's the noise I had before. Just made a few tweaks. And then, I guess most importantly, what I have done is before the pop sim, I've just put down a switch and a null. So at frame 70, .f greater than 70, it switches to the null, just to stop sourcing particles into the stop. So I did that based on when I thought the portal should be dissipating. So in this case, if we look at the character, he hits the ground, and then I expect as he comes to a rest, the portal will do whatever it needs to do there. So I've just plugged that whole switch into all three of my sources. Inside here, I did end up in the first pubnet. Let me cancel this. Basically, it's busy cooking on frame 1 because I've set the volume sim to start at -20 and the pubnet as well. Just because I don't want any time to wait here. So once we're looking at the rubbed out point cloud, I'll have a solid sim. And what I want to do is in sops after the sim try and make that moment that the portal sort of unwraps from nothing. I still want points there, so that saves me trying to do anything awkward with the sourcing. So we just have points now from frame 1, and we'll worry about it in sops afterwards, how they appear. So let me just set this pop back to 1. And if I go in here, this was the pop-up that was maintaining some flatness to the simulation, and this was the pop fluid I was playing with. So one thing I did find is you obviously start to see much more results with the more particles you had, and like I said before, the particle separation is highly dependent on the amount of points. So this is actually too high here. Basically what I've done is I have the scatter set to 200,000, and then I think if I changed this, but I found that a good value where I started to see an actual pop fluid reaction in the solver was 0.005, which is pretty small, I think. For now, I'm going to put this back up. This is my sort of testing number, and so we can see what it does. But basically, I tweaked these. I mean, if you read the captions that come up, it's pretty self-explanatory. But it's probably worth looking online and seeing if you can get some good examples, or looking at the documentation. So this is quite slow. There's quite a lot of points now. This is kind of at the point where I feel there's probably enough points to make this sort of production ready. And you can kind of see here the kind of fluid results. Let me switch this back to disks. It's a little bit hard to see because it's quite a subtle effect. So let me just reduce the points. Here's my delete. So I'm just going to delete most of the points. See if this speeds things up. You can kind of see it wants to maintain its edge, very similar to a fluid simulation. So I thought that looked pretty cool, so I've kept that in this popnet, and I want to take that through and see if we can see it further down the line. I really like this kind of result. And I got to this point pretty much just trying different values here. Like I ended up turning off viscosity. Tensile radius is how much the particles actually want to push each other apart. So, but again, this is based on what I'm trying to get is to feel like the particles actually want to stick together. So the radius is pretty small. And then the particle separation for me seemed to be the biggest effector. So put this to 1. You'll see that the whole surface tension kind of look is just magnified. So the whole simulation wants to stick together. So it's basically choose the amount of points you feel like is a good number that you want to move forward with, so something that's renderable, and then adjust the particle separation based on that until you're still seeing the result, but it's at the level you want. In this case, that was this value for me at 200,000 points. So that's pretty cool. I ended up liking that one. Let me change this back. And I have a flipbook. Basically, after the pop, I deleted any color less than 0.5 just to save even more space. So you see 44,000 and there was 75. So basically just saving some disk space. And this is the result. So the pop fluid effect is pretty subtle in this, and I could have gone more extreme, but I'm pretty happy with this. And you can see there the particles just stop sourcing at frame 70, which is fine. I've also set a different lifespan on each one of these, so I think it's like 2 and 3. And that's that. So if we look at the other one, I have the same thing. I have slightly different noise. Put in the same source stopping. And inside here, no different. So this is the basic one that we ended with last time. So nothing much to show there. So I'll show you the flipbook of this cache here. I really like this one. It is banding, so the source is still stepped quite a bit, but it kind of looks interesting. It kind of floats up, I guess because the volume might be lifting up slightly there, or not sure. But pretty happy with that one. And the last one, this was the one that has much more points. I went for a pretty rough noise here. That's changing very quick. And then what I did, just to try and make it even more different from the others, is I put down a wrangle and I said the Y position plus equals red. So I'm just adding this point color to the Y position. So as that noise moves around, the point cloud's going to move up and down, which will just alter the final advected particle result. Remove points as usual, this time quite a lot, so I'm getting my small pockets. Inside here, same. No changes there either. And the result is here. So with this one, I wanted to have very small sources that change quite quickly to get that sort of shooting, the shooting result. I mean, the way I picture it is in the portal, we might have quite a heavy base simulation of points to make the portal feel solid. And then I want these little flashes of highlights. So that's why I went down this kind of source for this one, to maybe use this render as a sort of little flashes of brighter points. So that's that. So you can see it's pretty much the same from where we left off, just with a few tweaks, and then basically experimenting and writing these out so I could show you guys. It didn't take too long. Let's have a look at our point count here. And obviously, I mean, we might come back and increase the number of points later on and rewrite these out. The moment is 2 million. 5 million, and yeah, sort of 400,000. So not too bad, and I feel like I'm managing it a bit by just removing anything in the source that we don't need. So I'm going to end this one here, and then basically we'll start to try and manipulate these sims now, and just see like how far we can take these base simulations that basically aren't really doing anything that we want from the portal, and try and sort of turn them into a portal, because I feel like comfortable that we have some interesting movement and we've got good like a good base to work from, but we need to somehow still turn this into a portal that opens and closes and everything else. And you'll also note that, I mean, up until now I've not used any sort of advanced techniques. This is all pretty basic stuff, and that's kind of the way I work. I mean, it's just finding the quickest way to get something, and as long as I have something that's usable, I can iterate on it later, and I think still use a bunch of interesting sop tools to turn it into something that looks much more complicated than it is. And just finally, on the ROP, you can see I've used that expression that I put in the null on object level. So that's just ROPing out to the location I've set as cache into a folder called FX Portal, and that one's ROP will be, the file here will be the name of this ROP, like that. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Hi guys, welcome back. So I have made one small change since the previous video. Basically I'm going to start experimenting from just this first pop sim I had, and it's not that crazy, but the point count is just enough that it's getting extremely slow to try and edit attributes and stuff. So we're sitting at 2.2 million, and what I did is just delete points by expression at ID modulus 10. So I'm basically keeping every 10th point, and I've written that out, and I put down a switch here so I can switch between low res and up res basically. So I'll start experimenting with the low res one. So what I need to do now is try and make this sim look like a portal. So we have the points, and I drew that image before. We knew we wanted just some source in the middle to emit points outward, but what I need is essentially the gate that the character is going to move through. So that is the portal shape, which I defined earlier on based on the character's scale. So I have that, and I'm going to try and just do an attribute transfer. Now, attribute transfer is my favorite thing to use. It just gets so much done. The problem is it is quite slow. But let's just jump in with this. So what I'm doing is I'll take the points and I'll attribute transfer their position, match P. So right now all the points in that sim have been transferred to the position around the edge of the circle, and obviously we don't really want that, so let's blend that instead. And you can see that already gives us quite a cool effect. Let's try some different functions. I'll stick with the default one. So let's just have a look how this moves, because obviously I'm a big fan of just editing the sims afterwards. We could have tried to do this in the pop sim, but I mean, and we might do this later, but for now it's much quicker if we just take that simulation and see how we can manipulate that afterwards. So let's play. Still quite slow, but what I do want to do, and I might just flipbook this a little bit quickly, what I do want to do is make sure that it doesn't look fake. So we are transferring the position of the point, so that could easily look wrong, like it's not still flowing. So let me flipbook this and let's have a look at our reference. So basically, I've already looked through a few of these, and I want something similar to this, where it's a pretty well defined exit basically of the portal that the character is going to jump through. So maybe I'll also try some sop tools to kind of get this funneling, or this tube. But I'm not going for something like this, so I do want a kind of solid edge. That's enough for us to check. Yeah, so I think this is actually working really well. It's completely fake how we're updating the position, but it doesn't feel unnatural. It actually feels pretty good. So I'm happy with that. So I think we're safe to use the shape, our initial shape, and just basically try and transfer that position even onto some of our other sims. So for now, let's see what else we can do with this one. And just as a little recap, basically this whole effect is going to be based on this one volume sim. And then I've split that off into 3 particle sims, and then each one of those I can then split off into multiple sort of experiments and merge together what I like. So we can be pretty sure that everything's going to move in a similar way and naturally, and then just layer up all those different experiments into something that looks extremely complex, but it's actually not. It's all based on one sim. And I think that's a pretty powerful way to tackle magic in general, because you can sell the fact that it's magic if it's all moving smoothly and realistically based on that pyrosim, but it's all the combination of layers and of fine points or big flakes, and once you combine all that together it looks really complex. So let's try something else. What I can do is actually take our initial circle shape and scale it down, and then transfer the position. So obviously we don't want that, so I'm going to reference copy this and invert the transform. So no matter what value I choose here, after the attribute transfer, it'll always be the same size opening. And you can see we have the same settings, so let's go a bit bigger there. The same size opening, the same size blend width, but we're getting a slightly different reaction because the circle's smaller. So here's what we can do, and I'm going to use multiple transforms instead of one. It's easier to find our way back. So I'm going to arbitrarily rotate this in some other direction, and then we have this smaller one. Let's merge those together. try some different angles here. So basically you can see how interesting this could start to look, because our base sim looks like that. And if we just did one manipulation, we'd get something like this. But you start to layer these up, and it gets really interesting looking. Let's try one more. I'll start with another transform. And this time, exaggerate the sort of depth into the room, or the height between the floor and the ceiling. So let's see, scale that, maybe scale the whole thing up, scale this up a bit. So now these points are going to kind of shoot down into the room, and I'm going to, just to make sure it looks like the rest of the portal, put down a wrangle and do kind of the same thing we were doing in the pop sims. I'll say if y is greater than 0, then y equals 0. So I'm not removing the points, I'll just keep them, but just flatten them down. And then you get this kind of, it's actually pretty cool as well. That's interesting. So I mean, what I'm trying to show is that without doing anything complicated, and this is the way I work because I'm not a technical person really, I consider myself just more of an artist. So I kind of do as much as I can with a more sort of simplified logic. So I could spend a long time trying to get this work in the sim, or I can just experiment with attribute transfers and wrangles and get really cool results, I think, outside of the sim. So we can merge this. Looks cool to me. So let's move on to one of the other sims. So this one I haven't done the same thing. To speed it up, it's actually not too bad, this one. I still really like the shapes. Oh, it gets slow down here. Let's see if we can just work with this. Right. So something I haven't done, and I'm going to do it on this one first quickly, because before I work on other experiments here, I need to define some colors or some ramps for the fall off. Because technically I don't want to have a look at this and see points that aren't supposed to exist anymore. So they're supposed to have died. We don't want to see them the moment they pop out of existence. So just start with this low res sim here. Put down a color swap. And let's ramp using age, because I know we have age. And get something that kind of fades off. So in this case, it's the other way around. I want the color to fade off based on age. And I can just refit this here. And that feels pretty good. So, and I'll base the alpha off of this color as well. So we have the point slowly disappearing and fully disappearing just before it actually dies. So that's cool. Let's just have it fade in as well. So a small fade in, and then let's make this blue. So I'm not spending too much time here on the color specifically. I'm just kind of doing a basic version of what I think I want to see, which is sort of the usual thing for me. We have the points being born, and I don't want to see that specifically, so I'll fade that in, and then it reaches a bright point and then slowly fades off until it disappears. So a ramp like this is kind of usual for me, and then I can tweak it later on. One thing I do want to do is multiply that color by the color that we're getting from the sim. So we did have noise as our source. That's been simmed through the advection, so we're getting spots of white and then some darker areas as well. So that's probably the most interesting looking noise. So we just have a basic ramp here, and maybe let me switch to the higher point count so we can see it more clearly. That's the basic ramp based on age, and I'll take the second input and we say color will be multiplied by the point attribute of the second input, which in this case is 1. We want to take CD, which is from the switch basically, at ptnum, and then I think there's a float at the end. Yeah, I think that's right. That looks right. So that's good, and then I'll also add alpha at this point. So I'll do the same thing. Alpha is multiplied by the blue. So where it's brightest blue, it should be 1. Actually, I'm going to clamp this. So alpha equals the clamped value of blue between 0 and 1. So that looks good. So at this point the points are semi-transparent and they become more solid, and then they fade off in the alpha just before they die. And to visualize this a bit better, I usually use disks. It's just a bit softer in the viewport, but it's much slower. So I kind of like this. So now we get this all plugged in here. I'll switch back to the low res sim for now. Yeah, that looks good. So one thing I notice now is, I think obviously, put down our angle again. What we don't want is for all of these layers that we're merging together to sort of flatten out. So I need something as a highlight, and this being the smallest one and the one that's closer to being just the circle, I'm just going to multiply the color here. Check the high res. yeah, so we just have now at least one of those sims with a slightly different color, just a bit brighter around the middle. This is when I start to sort of get distracted and try other options here. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. So something like that, I'll carry on tweaking that later. But I mean, the general rule for me, and it's like I described in this ramp, is here we have the point of interest being the brightest point. And then we have that ramp falling off as it goes out. So I did need to at least take one of these networks and just really brighten it up to highlight that ring. Jumping over to this one, I'll do the same. I'm going to use a VOP this time. I'm still kind of getting to grips with trying to transition to wrangles, so I'm usually much more happy working in a VOP. So, but we'll do the same thing. This time I'll take age and I'll divide it by life. Put down a ramp. And put that into color. So here's our ramp here. So we have the same thing basically from light to dark. And because I've divided the two values, that will fall off perfectly from light to dark at the full range of the age. And then we want to multiply. In this way, it's actually quicker to do this in one. I could just multiply using the same input. So I have CD here. I can actually put a ramp down on this one as well. And I'll put down length. So I'm taking the luminosity of color. Call this something else. And multiply the age color by the original color. So here we can see we've got that interesting pattern that's coming from our source noise. And here I have a little control to kind of exaggerate how much of that noise is multiplying the ramp, which then you can play with stuff like this, get some interesting streaks. And actually I want this ramp to be color, and we'll just do another blue. So we have a blue color there, and then we multiply that. Let's try some quick shapes here. See how much detail you can get just by playing around. Right, that looks really cool. I'll leave that like that, and then I'll take the wrangle. So we don't need the second input, because all I want to copy from this wrangle is the alpha. So same thing, take alpha, multiply it by blue, and clamp that. And I've also just got an idea. to remove some points, because I will be saving out each one of these again, and I'm working with quite a lot of points. So what I can do is I'll jump into this wrangle here and say if the alpha is less than some small value, then we'll remove the point. What's the syntax here? So remove the point at PT num. So remove that point that has an alpha less than 0.01. So let's just see if this is working. Yeah, so we can see points being removed, and so once we have that in place and we write this out, at least we're saving some disk space and some point count. So I'll copy that into this wrangle as well. Yeah, that's removing a lot. I mean, I might not want to remove that much, but I'll leave that for now. Visualize disks. That doesn't look right. Aha. Yep, this looks really cool. I like this. So the difference is I just basically used a pop-up. I could have again done the same thing with a wrangle, and I've got a color based on age, and I'm multiplying that by the color from the sim, and I've put a ramp down for that so I can experiment and get different intensities in different areas. And then once again basing alpha off of that, and alpha is not 100% necessary at this point, but I like to visualize it the way I think it's going to be rendered. So I like to work through this and change settings, visualizing where transparent areas are going to be. So that's why I do that, and then I guess I can use the alpha attribute in the shader as well. Right, so what do we want to try and do with this? Let's take our circle. Actually, let's just transfer the position again. Start with that. So here we've got the same kind of setup. You can see the attribute transfers a bit slow. Same kind of setup, and then let's see if we can make that kind of tube kind of what's the word I'm looking for, funnel, and I have some kind of tunnel moving up from the circle. So first thing comes to mind for me is, let's see what happens when we try and duplicate this up. So I just drop down duplicate, which is actually a copy and transform, and here I'll just not rotate, I'll move it up so each copy goes up. That's a bit high. It's actually running pretty fast, so it's pretty easy to iterate and experiment here. Rotation for each one. go a bit higher here. Maybe try scale it up. Just on Y, getting the kind of same effect we had on the other one. But in this case, for each copy, it's getting even more scaled in this direction. So that looks kind of cool. And we can even scale the whole thing down. Oh, I kind of like that. That looks super interesting. I would like to see this moving. It's a bit slow. I really like that. So I think this will work great. I do want this portal to kind of warp up into the ceiling of the environment. So it can't be too narrow because the character has to drop down. I'll have to play around with these, but you can see how powerful even just that basic duplicate node can be when you have a good natural underlying sim. And you get some amazing results. What I'm going to do is drop down another. Actually, I've got one here. We'll take this wrangle and I'll do the opposite. So I'll remove any points that come into the room and just keep the ones that are shooting off into the ceiling. Super cool. So let's I want to flipbook this, but it's gonna take a while, so I might pause and do that so we can look at it, and I'll come back to it. I am thinking what I need to do is, if I'm basing everything off of this attribute transfer, I can try and close the portal, because what we have now is we have this shape which just exists forever, and I have the particles dying at frame 70, I think it was. So at frame 70 they just do that. But right now I have these attribute transfers. So at frame 70, yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool, but I did want that portal to suddenly close after the character landed on the floor. So the portal to shrink into a singularity just before the particles stop emitting. So I'm going to animate this circle and we'll see how that looks. Maybe I'll flipbook that. So if this works, then basically we're safe, because everything that we decide to use the same method to force the portal to the shape will also handle the closing of the portal. So let's say from 55 to maybe just before 70. We scale down, and I always jump straight into the animation editor here, because what I would usually do, I'm guessing, would have it ramp something like this, so it slowly starts to shut and then quickly accelerates and closes. For now, let's just have a look at the default, see how it looks. So I'm going to flipbook this quickly because this is where we need to get the timing right. Although we have made this fully procedural, so later on I can always change this transformation timing, and if I mean, all of our attribute transfers will be based on that. So I'm not too worried about moving on. Yes, I'm actually quite surprised that this feels still pretty natural. The points obviously move outwards as the circle is getting smaller because of that blend in the attribute transfer, but it feels kind of like they're being pushed outwards, so it still feels natural. So definitely a timing issue here. So I'll just make one tweak now. Once again, don't want to spend too long on that. So I'm going to change it to close at the same frame the particles stop, and I'm going to do it exponentially. I'll quickly do one more flipbook. Once I've done some experiments for each one of these, I'll probably flipbook each one using the high res sim. So in the next video I can recap and we'll have something to watch. That feels a bit better. So it's still closing. It's closed for too long before the particles stop. Just a little bit. But I'm going to leave it like that for now, because I could spend ages tweaking that. But just so you know what my thought process is, it's just making it snappy. So I want the portal to slowly start to close and then to snap shut, and at that same moment feel like all the points have stopped sourcing. So you get this shut portal and this explosion of points outwards. So it's just a matter of tweaking the timing of that animation to get that feel. And so we've gotten a really cool result on this one. I'm really happy with this. So I'll definitely be flipbooking this so we can look at it in the next video. There's a lot of detail there. And let's quickly try something with the last sim before I stop this one. This was the one that, oh, we're lucky because there's much fewer points here, where I wanted it to feel like there were highlights that were shooting out. So it's got a very small noise and the points kind of come shooting out in small areas. So let's actually duplicate these two. I mean, once again, I can make changes for each of these, you know. I can try some different ramps here. Now I'm just playing around. But so that each layer has a slightly different effect. So that's cool, but I definitely want bright flashes. think maybe I don't want to remove points from this one. Or I'll just brighten everything up. I'm just not happy with the way this one's visualizing. It looks cool, but I'm not seeing this bright color. So maybe I have a completely different age range on this one. I'm just going to throw a constant multiply in here. Because we're multiplying it by... No, we're not. So I should see this color update. There you go. Yeah, I mean, I want something extreme. I might have to adjust this when we're doing shading, but at least I can see it. Let me save. Okay. Now what can we do? Just thinking through this. So I've got the same closing system throughout, so that no matter which particle simulation I'm using will close based on the same animation, which is what I want. And I need something to define this ring, but maybe not for every one. So you see, if we look at this one, I have two of these sims constrained to the ring, and then I'm merging this one, which actually isn't. That doesn't have any constraint. So here I'll experiment with both as well. So let's take this circle and try something. I'm going to copy some lines. Oh, that's kind of interesting. That's not what I meant to do. I'm still not sure why this one's going up. I think it's just there's either a slight upward velocity in the pop sim, I can't remember, or it's the volume sim. So what I was thinking is I'll reduce the amount of points here with a resample, and then copy some lines. So we have these lines going outwards from the opening of the portal. I'll put a random scale here. Just based on PT. Between 0.5 and 2. And add some more points, because what I'm doing is actually transferring my sim to those lines now. That's freaky. So that's kind of cool. I'm going to actually merge merge the actual circle in with the lines as well. Yeah, so this could work because what we have, and this follows the theme of the whole sci-fi thing, we want something at least slightly geometric, maybe visible, to kind of sell that it's technology and not some kind of natural magic. Let's just move this. What I want to do is, if we're going to merge this, I'm actually going to transform this sim down a little bit. Just so it'll fall underneath the other sims I have. Right, and then for the sake of having another layer, let's take the unattribute transferred version and merge it on top. I guess I should rotate this again. So I think this can work quite nicely because we have that shooting, we have those points shooting out, and now we have shooting lines as well. So constrained to those lines, we get some interesting shapes. Let's see if I can flipbook this one for us quickly. That's kind of cool. I like it. It's kind of interesting to see the points being attracted to something. Now I mustn't forget, because what I'm missing is the closing. I like that, but I mustn't forget that I have this closer anim here. I'll reference copy that and put it in all of these. Yeah, so that's good. I'll end this one here and carry on playing with it. I'll probably end up wrapping all of these out and flipbooking them. So in the next one we can see how they all look after my tweaks, and I'll do a recap of what I changed and I guess what I think the most important and powerful tools in this section of the network are for me. So see you then. Hi guys. So I have made a few tweaks, not much, and I've written out a ROP for each one of these streams we were working on before. So to quickly cover the changes, I actually didn't change anything on this stream here. Maybe just some slight changes to the blend width. So that's pretty much the same as the last version you saw. So here's the flipbook. So I could probably still work on the timing more of when the portal dissipates. But I'm relatively happy with this version for now. One thing I don't see as much as I was hoping to see is this is the sim that I used the pop the new pop fluid. And I'm not really seeing much of that, although maybe it would look very different if I hadn't used it. If I look very closely, there is some subtle fluid-like, surface tension style. But otherwise, I'm pretty happy. I like the smaller details. So at the center here, there's the more attribute transferred point cloud that's kind of closer in on the circle, and it sort of adds a higher detail area in the middle, which is perfect. So we're keeping that one. And if I go to the second one, I decided to remove points in this one also based on velocity. So I've added a second wrangle, and I've said if the length of the velocity is less than 2, and I checked the spreadsheet, then remove that point as well. So in that case, it's keeping it. You can see it's there's a few gaps. So if a point slows down enough, it'll disappear and then it might come back into existence. So I'm not 100% sure if that's going to work, but I kind of thought it might add something interesting. And then it also keeps some of the outside points that I was losing before. And this is the one I actually duplicate. So I guess here's the biggest difference is I've keyed this. So if I show you, what happens is at frame 10, it slowly goes from no duplicates and ramps up to 7 at frame 20. So there'll be just the one ring, and then it'll go exponentially up to 7. And at the same time, I'm also moving them up. So over time, using a similar ramp, the transformation value on Y is also increasing. And then what I've done is scaled it down on X and Z slightly, and scaled it up, which I did last time as well. And then we move the Y points minus Y to the origin, and I flip this out. So this is my first kind of attempt at an opening animation. We still need to deal with the actual how the portal appears. We're kind of dealing with how it's closing, but this is the first attempt at trying to make a timing for the actual opening. So we still need to get rid of this first section, but at frame 10 basically we have this animation of this duplicate, which I think is pretty successful. So I like this. And then the last one, I think I just tweaked some of these values and the scale of the lines. So no big changes there, didn't animate anything. I didn't. I'm just scaling it up here. So like with this transform where I moved it down a bit, then after the transfer I'm actually just scaling this one up. So my thought process behind that is the opening of the portal is here, and we have everything adhering to the circle in the center over there. So if I want an element to feel more sci-fi, and so we have these lines, and like the duplicate version we have those very definite rings moving up, I might also have a horizontal ring moving outwards from the center. I don't know if you'll see it at the end, but I've just scaled the whole system up, and we'll see how it looks from there. doesn't make much of a difference here. And this one is, I like this, and I like the feel. It goes really crazy there because the sphere that has, the circle that has the lines copied to it is changing drastically when it scales down. But I don't really hate it. It's quite dynamic. So that's where we're at for now. And I think this is a good place to stop and, let's say, end week 1. There's a lot to play with here. We're in a pretty good state. There's lots of experimenting you can do between the volume sim, the particle sims, and then manipulating each one of those sims as well. So there's plenty to mess around with. And in the next week, we'll just have to figure out how the portal is actually going to animate to an opening state. And then we need to do some scene lighting, some shading, rendering, add some additional effects in the environment to help sell the portal's place in the environment. So it's going to be a bit more of a busy week, I think, than this week has been. But hopefully you're starting to see my general kind of approach and workflow, and my focus on making sure what I'm looking at is good and using the most simple tools available to me here to get there. So I'll see you guys in week 2. Hey guys, so I hope you enjoyed week 1, and let's just look at some of the places where you could put your own spin on this, or if you're looking at different reference, maybe try and incorporate that reference into your effect instead of just replicating exactly what I'm doing here. So there's no shortage of areas here where you could come up with a completely different looking effect than where we are at the moment. So for starters, just a reminder that this entire effect is based off of one volume sim. So changing the source of your volume from a sphere or having different velocities, messing around obviously in the volume DOP itself, will give you wildly different results once we get to the particle advection. So that's a good time to put a spin on the simulation that you think more closely matches something you've seen in some other reference. Obviously it could be something that's not a flat portal like the one we're going for over here. Not to mention then we've done basically already 3 variations on the particle advection. So lots of things to play with in there, and you saw we had one option where we used the pop fluid solver. That's one option, and there's a million other ways you could advect those points. You could possibly even use a force instead of using the velocity advection. And then not to mention plenty of room down here to tweak as well. So we've already come up with some pretty interesting results, I think, just by messing around with some of these SOP tools, something like this. So as I showed you during one of the videos, you could add a twist to this, you could deform it in a million other ways as well. And I would suggest you spend quite a bit of time experimenting with the standard Houdini deformers to try and see what you can get. Also, not to mention that the colors themselves are based on a very basic addition of color to the source. So you can go more or less sci-fi as well with these elements, depending on how you're sourcing color into the particles themselves. So it's at this point probably more than in week 2 where you can really affect the final look of our portal over here. So really, I encourage you to spend a lot of time experimenting and trying to see if you can push this in a completely different direction. So with that, I will see you guys in week 2.